Hey, did you see tickets just went on sale for HomebrewCon? This year it's June 28th through 30th in Portland, Oregon, also known as Beervana. It's 3 unforgettable days of all things homebrew, sampling, educational sessions, shopping for new gear, and more sampling. Space is limited, so register now at homebrewcon.org. That's homebrewcon.org, and we'll see you there. Welcome to Basic Brewing Radio for Thursday, March 15th, 2018, one day after my son's 21st birthday. I'm James Spencer. Here at Basic Brewing Radio, we're all about home brewing. This week, a bourbon-barrel-aged Russian Imperial Stout that Steve Wilkes and I got to take part in. We'll sample it and get the details about the brew from coordinator and barrel owner Reece Morrison. If you go to basicbrewing.com, you can find archives of our audio and video shows, our DVDs, our brewer's logbooks, and other Basic Brewing gear. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Basic Brewing and find our show page on Facebook. We have a cool Basic Brewing app on iTunes and Amazon.com, and we're found all over the place where fine podcasts are served up. If you'd do us the favor of rating us on iTunes and maybe leaving a nice comment or a nice comment, that'll either one. They say that'll help new listeners to find us. And if you want to support us financially, check out patreon.com/basicbrewing. This past Friday, I posted to the public our latest Basic Brewing video episode, Electric Party Guile. This is the episode where Steve and I brewed 4 batches of beer from one mash. It's an opportunity for us to show everybody that we're not perfect. We goofed up a time or two on brew day, but we recovered, we improvised, and we got through it. Steve brewed a Belgian Golden, and I brewed a porter, and then I split the porter and added some more stuff to it for 2 more brews. How did they turn out? Well, I introduced a new feature this time called Did I Ruin It? Tasty, interesting lessons learned by all. This Friday, I'm going to pre-release our 30-minute New England IPA episode to legacy PayPal subscribers and to $5 Patreon subscribers. I did a very simple brew where I added all the hops post-boil and let the temperature fall naturally during the hop stand. And spoilers, turned out pretty good. The general public will see that on the 23rd of March. Let's look into the mailbag. Todd from Texas listened to this past week's show with Omar Al-Nadawi about the D.C. Homebrewers Club adjunct experiment. Omar and I were talking about sorghum syrup, and Todd thought we were talking about 2 different things. Todd says, I wanted to clarify something about the sorghum. There are many varieties of sorghum. They all produce grain. Of course, that's because that's how they reproduce. But only a few species of the plant have sugary stalks that can be pressed for the juice and made to syrup. That's what it sounds like you've used, but Omar mentioned using sorghum syrup and getting earthy flavor like when making gluten-free beers. I think what Omar was using was not the syrup made from the pressed sorghum stalks, but rather a malt syrup made from malted sorghum grains like malt extract homebrewers buy. Todd says, I think that sorghum malt keeps the earthy grain flavor while actual sorghum syrup is more like a sweeter molasses. Well, I sent that note to Omar to clarify, and he said, Todd sure knows his sorghum. Omar says, I went back and checked my brewing notes, and I stand corrected. The syrup that I had used in that old batch was indeed the high maltose extract of malted sorghum, not the concentrated cane juice. So thanks to Todd and Omar for clarifying that. Talking about sorghum and syrup combinations can get confusing, especially if you're deciding between syrup and syrup. Let's talk about electric brewing systems from our sponsors Desiree and Dave from High Gravity in Tulsa. In the latest Basic Brewing video episode, you'll see both Steve and my systems. I have the 15.5-gallon total capacity 240-volt model, and he has the 11-gallon total capacity 120-volt version of the Brew-in-a-Bag systems. To compare the specs of the two, my system can raise the temperature of 8 gallons of water at a rate of 4 degrees per minute. And Steve's is at 2 degrees per minute. That's because mine is at 4,500 watts, and his is at 2,250 watts. That's according to Dave at High Gravity. Both are pretty quick, but if you're impatient, one advantage that Steve's system has over some competitors of that similar size is that you can put it onto the stovetop to add more heat while you're coming up to strike water temperature. So I don't think Steve has ever felt the need to do that, though. Both are very easy to store because everything that comes with the system fits into the kettle, so a small footprint in the basement or closet. And both systems come with the Warthog EBC 130 controller with dual mash and boil modes. You know, my kettle is bigger, so I can do 10-gallon batches, or as in this week's show, a very high-gravity 5-gallon batch. So it's all in what fits your needs. Check out all the electric system and controller options out there, including, traditional 3-vessel systems at family-owned and operated highgravitybrew.com, and use the promo code EBC75BB for $75 off your electric brewing purchase. That's at highgravitybrew.com. Well, this is a fun show to record and a fun project to take part in. We certainly appreciate Reece Morrison for asking us to do it. In this interview, we talk about the brewing process, and we talk a bit about the challenges of brewing such a high-gravity beer and brewing a lot of it. Well, here we are in the back room of Steve's Brew Shop in Fayetteville, Arkansas, with the owner, Steve Wilkes.
Hey, James.
And Reece Morrison, who is, depending on when you hear the show or when I run the previous episode that we just recorded, this is either your first or second appearance on the show. Welcome, Reece.
Hello.
Now, we are sipping on a mighty tasty beer here, and it is a collaboration beer. Steve, you and I brewed some of this that's in this class. It is a delicious beer. Reece, what are we drinking?
We are drinking a Russian Imperial Stout that was aged in a bourbon barrel for about 8 months.
All right. Now, while Steve and I sip, give us some background on every time we have a new brewer on the show. I try to get a little background and talk about who you are and where you came from as far as the beer world.
Yeah, I started brewing about 4 or 5 years ago, roughly. Started off when I first got into it at all grain from the get-go, and did a lot of research, and part of that research was actually finding Basic Brewing podcast, and started listening to you guys, and then found out through listening to the podcast that, and I didn't know initially you were local in this area, and then found out later through you mentioning Farmington, Arkansas, that you're actually here. So that was kind of crazy, but yeah, so just been brewing for 4 or 5 years, and something I really enjoy to do.
And where did you come up with this idea for this collaboration?
Well, I guess it probably started with my love for bourbon. So I'm also a big bourbon fan. My brother and I share that together. My brother lives in Indiana, and we meet up in Kentucky quite a bit, and we'll go do some bourbon tours and things like that. And he had a connection there. He's actually in a thing called the Bourbon Mafia, which there's a real thing called the Bourbon, which is weird. But anyway, so he had a connection with one of his friends there at Angel's Envy Distillery in Louisville, and we got a couple bourbon barrels. And so I've been asking him for some time, hey, I need a bourbon barrel so I can brew a stout or throw some beer in there. And so that's how that came about. And then we went and my wife and I drove to Indiana after these barrels were freshly dumped out, and had 2 barrels sitting in the back of our little small SUV. So that was a fun trip. And came back, and I tell you what, these kinds of projects, and one thing I've learned, you want to have a lot of people helping you, because it's a lot to take and brew the majority yourself. And so that was an interesting experience, to say the least.
So, two questions: how big were the barrels, and how good was the bung, the cork? Because it seems like the fumes from a couple of bourbon barrels in an SUV would be fun.
Oh yeah.
And how about the open container laws?
I mean,
What do you say, Sheriff?
Yeah, I mean, I said a couple prayers that we wouldn't get pulled over. I was just like, yeah, but yeah, it was interesting. I tell you what, that car smelled great, and it smelled great for a couple weeks. I mean, it lingered around, and I was not angry. If you've ever been, if you've ever been in a bourbon rick house, that's kind of a good smell. So, yeah, I was excited about that.
So, how big were these barrels?
53 gallons.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is a real bourbon barrel.
The real deal.
Yeah.
And 53 to fill a 53-gallon barrel, you've got to brew that much beer and then more. So how did the planning go for this? How did you bring together everybody, and how much did you anticipate having finished beer having to go into the barrels?
Yeah, so figured out we need about 60 gallons of beer. So that's what we brewed, was 60 gallons. Just so we had some extra to top off the barrel there's a thing, called angel share that will evaporate depending on where you have it. So we brewed a little bit extra to make sure we had that sitting on the side when we needed it, and topped it off periodically. I started thinking about, who could help me in this scenario, and brew with Joe Covey, who you've actually, I think, done some shows with, but we're brew partners, been for a long time. And so he helped me brew a lot of the batches, and we brewed together on that. And then we also had Todd Gill contributed 5 gallons of beer. I went to high school with Todd, so knew him, and he was able to help out. And then you guys brewed a 5-gallon batch. So we had, some other contributors, but it would have been nice to have more, honestly. So, yeah. As far as like planning it out, putting it all together, it was a lot of just, taking the time to just plan out all the different scenarios. I read, some articles, I watched some videos, obviously YouTubed it, and read I should have brought the book, but it's Wood and Beer or something like that. I don't know. I could find the name. But yeah, I read a book. It was pretty in depth on how to treat the barrel, how to, make sure that you're, handling everything right. So there's a lot of research on the front end that I went into just to make sure that, we're going to brew all this beer. This is a big project. I don't want to screw it up, kind of thing. So.
And you had an advantage in that these were fresh barrels that they were still wet, right?
Oh yeah. We picked my brother picked the barrels up the day they were dumped. It was that day. Picked them up the same day, and then we got them a couple days after that and took them back. So, you could still hear the little bit of bourbon sloshing around in the barrel. Yeah, it was super fresh.
And maybe we're jumping ahead of ourselves, but did you dump that bourbon before you put the beer in?
Of course not. If we got barrel proof, so to speak, bourbon in the barrel, the best stuff you can drink, we're going to leave it in there.
I'd have been tempted to drink it.
Or at least taste a little. So
well,
did you taste a little sample?
We did. Well, so my brother had it. We had a couple other barrels. So the one that he kept, we did dump that one that night at his house and drank it out of there, and it was fantastic.
Yeah. Now, tell me again what the distillery was.
It's called Angel's Envy, but actually they got the barrel. So Angel's Envy does some secondary projects on the bourbon that they dump out, and they'll re-age in other barrels of different kinds. And so the original barrel came from Barton's Distillery, who they do 1792 bourbon. You might have heard of them. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I usually stick to beer. Steve, you're adventurous in the distilled spirits territory, more than I.
I'm an all-temperature lush.
Hot, warm, and cold.
Hot and cold.
So let's talk about the recipe. What went into formulating the recipe, and then talk about the details a bit.
So, obviously brewed quite a few stouts, and so pulled some knowledge from that, from the previous stouts that I've brewed, and then did some, in the research process, what's going to hold up to the barrel, the kinds of flavors. So I did more, researching, read some forums, different things like that, and then came to a recipe out of that. So it's kind of a combination of stuff that I've brewed already, and then, a couple other things that I'd read. And so that's where it kind of came about. But, you want me to go give you the bill here, the grain bill?
Yeah, give us the details.
So we got, this is for a 5.5 gallon batch. I did 11 gallon batches. So just to kind of half that for what most people are probably brewing. So 18 pounds of maris otter. We did 1 pound, 8 ounces of roasted barley.
And give us the percentages of the grain bill. So since we don't have the metric, let's do the percentages of the grain bill while you're at it.
So 18 pounds of maris otter, which was 82.8%. 1.5 pounds of roasted barley, which was 6.9%. 1 pound of special B, which was 4.6%. 12 ounces of chocolate malt, which was 3.4%. And then 8 ounces of carapils, which was 2.3%. And then I believe there was 2.9 ounces of Magnum, 60-minute.
So just a single hop addition.
Yeah. Because you're not going to keep hop character and that kind of process. So, yeah.
So we Steve, you and I brewed this beer, we brewed a 5-gallon share, or around a 5-gallon share. And I say around because we brewed on my brew in a bag system, because you didn't think that that you were going to be able to fit all the grain in and be able to mash in your system. So from what you recall, how did that brew day go?
I thought the brew day went very smoothly. I remember it clearly, even though we were drinking. But I remember the day, and it was a pretty day, and the brew day went very well. I remember that the challenge that we had to decide as we were brewing it was whether to brew to volume or brew to gravity. And we decided to brew to gravity. We wanted to hit the gravity that Reece's recipe said we should be at. So we ended up with a slightly lower volume of beer, so that we boiled off enough of that liquid to get to the original gravity that we wanted in the beer. So I think we ended up with about 4.5 gallons instead of 5, something like that.
So for this 5.5-gallon recipe, what's the total weight of all the grain? It's like 20-something, 22 pounds or something like that?
Yeah, roughly 22 pounds around there.
Yeah. So when we started out, for a 5-gallon batch of standard, like 1050 gravity beer, I start out with my brew in a bag system with 8 gallons of water. And so that's what we started with. And then we put all this grain in there, and it was like, it was like we were trying to build a building, and that was mortar, So I think we added at least 2 more gallons, and maybe 3, so that we could get the viscosity down, so that we could get a mash that looked kind of normal. And that's one thing that and that worked out. I mean, the mash turned out really well, and once you figure in the volume of wort that we collected versus the amount of grain, and we've lost our notes unfortunately on the brew day, but I think our efficiency was pretty good, for that amount of grain in that volume. But Reece, you and I talked after you've been doing some of the brewing, and you were kind of concerned about your efficiency levels doing these brews.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, brewing that 11-gallon batches, they're already pretty big. I mean, I brew in a batch barge system with coolers, and so it was taking up all the space there, and so just not enough space really for the water and the grain, and so the efficiency was not good. So a couple of things that we did, we went back and double grinded the grains, and that seemed to help. And so I remember I was like, this is getting old, because we were brewing and then we were mashing, and then the numbers weren't coming out. So we ended up taking some of the grains and grinding them and brought them back, and that seemed to help actually. And then we kept some dry malt extract as well. So I actually did some of that when I needed to. I mean, you got to where that grinding helped quite a bit, and then I did add some of the dry malt extract just to get to the number I wanted occasionally. So, but yeah, there was some definitions. What I would do is make sure that you just reduce down your efficiency if you're brewing a little bit bigger batches. So, reduce it down to, if you're normally at 74, maybe go to 70, 68, something like that. That's one way to do it as well.
And there's a show in the archives, and I'll try to remember on the tail out of this interview to tell you which one. But there's a show that I did with Chris Colby of beerandwinejournal.com and I think the topic was why high gravity beers are less efficient. And I think it is because when we come into this situation, we have the thinking that we're going to use the same amount of water or a similar amount of water as we would a normal gravity beer. And then so if you think about if you use the proper amount of water for a normal like a 1050 beer and you get like 70% efficiency, adding twice as much grain is not going to your efficiency is not going to be 140%. Right. It's not going to go up. It's actually going to go down because when you drain out that water, when you louder out the water or the wort, and if you sparge, like if you're in a sparging situation and you only sparge the normal amount, there's still going to be a ton of sugar left in that grain that you're not going to get out. And so one solution is to, like, what was the starting gravity of this beer?
1 point. Well, it varied, and I was okay with that because I sprayed so many different ones to vary a little bit. But I went from as low as 1.105 to 1.120.
Wow. See, so that's a big beer. So one way that you can get that way is to collect twice as much wort, and then boil down.
Right.
So you're getting all those sugars out of that grain. You're sparging all that you're just getting all the sugars that you can possibly get out of that grain bill. Mm-hmm. Then what you've got is a wort that is twice as much, but half the gravity. So, you get maybe 10 or 10 or 12 gallons of wort at 1050 or 1060 or, whatever is close, to that. And then you just got to take the time and just literally boil the water out of that wort and get it down to a higher gravity, which is essentially what we did.
It's exactly what we did, except we also didn't really plan for it, meaning that we ended up with less beer than we meant to. So we did a really good job. I mean, I'm not saying that we blew it, but exactly, if we had even more, we could have boiled down to it more efficiently.
Yeah. So I think that we still left some, and in brew in a bag, there's especially in with all this grain in that vessel, you're gonna leave maybe a little more than if we had done a fly sparge or something like that to rinse the grains as thoroughly as we could. But I'm still pretty proud of what we did because we were I can't remember the exact volume. Maybe it was 4 gallons, maybe a little more, but we were pretty close to the 5 gallons. But we were checking with the refractometer the entire way, and we hit our mark. I think it was 1100 or whatever it was, our target, and we hit that. Yeah. And the wort tasted good. And you brewed the beer, and it was happy. Did we say what yeast we used?
I believe I used White Labs English Ale, WLP 002.
And it seems like we cheated. We substituted a couple of packets of maybe dry yeast or something like that.
I'm pretty sure we just used SO4. Sheffield SO4.
Yeah, whatever it was happy.
That was interesting. So part of the challenge was all the yeast that we had to get. So there was seemed like a constant flow of starters, and we did brew some other. There was a couple batches of beer that we brewed, and took the yeast cake off of those, and then started those, and so it was. You can't have enough yeast for a big beer like that, and that, by the way, was one of the most interesting things was seeing. I will say this is probably my number one tip on this. If you're going to do something like this, this is what I learned more than anything was make sure that you have your blow off hose because it makes sure that you have that set up properly. The first time we did it, had it set in the buckets in a 5-gallon bucket, and we had like these tubes, these random silicone tubes going into the 5-gallon bucket, and it was filled up a little too high, and it boiled over.
Your blow-off bucket.
Yeah. So make sure you've got ample space because it is an aggressive ferment, to say the least. Yeah.
Do you remember what our finished beer tasted like before you handed it over?
Yeah, it tasted really good. I didn't want to hand it over. In fact, Todd Gill came in, and we were discussing that. We both agreed that we thought, well, let's just keep it. It's pretty good. And but I remember that it tasted, it was just a big stout, and it tasted really, really good, really big and chocolatey and Russian-y. Yeah. But a year on bourbon is like this is way better.
One of the worst things about the project is when you're filling the barrel, and so then you gotta taste test every batch to make sure that it's okay, right? So that was a tough job, taste testing 60 different 5-gallon batches or whatever it was. But no, that was a fun day.
And we've done one or two similar episodes. We did one with Casey Letelier over in Siloam Springs with the brew club that he was a part of. They filled a barrel as well. And part of the issue was, when you get a collaborative brew together and you're asking all these different people to contribute beers, you've got to have the chutzpah to, if you come across a batch of beer that's not good, that you don't think is worth putting in that barrel, you can't be gentle and say, let's put it in anyway. You've got to step up, and you've got to tell that brewer, I'm sorry, something went wrong. Did you have to face that?
No. Luckily,
there was this beer that James and Steve brewed.
Yeah. No, it was. They were all fantastic, really. It was just. Call it luck or whatever, but they all just turned out really well. And by the way, some of them did have little different variances, here and there, which was interesting, especially from different brewers. You would get a little bit different take on whatever, but very similar. But you could taste some differences. And at the end, though, you gotta, if you're gonna put something in a barrel for 8 months to a year, it better be good, before it goes in there.
And how long has this been in there?
So it aged in there for 8 months. So yeah.
And when did you bottle it?
Oh man, bottled it. I don't even remember now. Probably December area. Yeah, in December.
It was mid-December.
Yeah.
I just remember drinking one, right before the Yuletide.
Yeah. So it was believe put in February, January, February, March, and that let's say February to March time frame, and then we ended up bottling in December.
So what's in the barrel now?
Nothing.
Oh. So are you taking? They say it's not good to leave a dry barrel. So
it's not. So that's kind of the next step is it's such a big project, and so I do want to put another beer in there. But I'm gonna have to rehydrate the barrel, and there's a process to that. I've been as part of the book, same book talks about that, how to make sure you've got your barrel rehydrated, and if it has to be resanitized and things like that. So, but it's best to keep it full if you can.
Yeah. Well, Steve, you and I are willing to step up again, don't you think?
We're in like Flynn.
So this is a 13% beer. Did you take into account now? Is that just the beer, or did you factor in the bourbon as well.
Yeah, so it's an estimation. It sounds good, yeah. Okay. So, but going in, it was probably 11 to 11.5. So I figured it probably took in, maybe 1.5%. So I just figured, hey, 13% sounds good. Let's do that.
That's my lucky number.
Baker's dozen.
But it is okay. So I told you one of the dangers about, first of all, drinking beer and recording, but then second of all, talking about what you're about to talk about before you hit the record button. Did I tell the Twitter story on I don't think I did on the recording. If I did, I'll cut it out. But the other day, I sampled my first bottle of this. Well, it's been a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
I sampled my first bottle of this, and I was like, "Wow, bourbon! Wow!" And I tweeted, actually, I said, "I'm drinking a homebrew bottle of bourbon barrel Russian Imperial Stout. It's delicious, but I'm wondering if they emptied the barrel at all before they put the beer in, because man, it was just like bam in your face with bourbon." And again, I wasn't complaining because it was still, even though there was that much bourbon, it didn't seem that hot to me. It still tasted like a beer, but wow, it was unbalanced in a very fun way. But this bottle that we're tasting has been in my 50-degree cellar basement, storm shelter for since then, and we're tasting this now, and boy, it's really mellowed a lot, even since then.
It has mellowed a bunch. However, now that it's warming, the bourbon is beginning to come out. I don't know if you guys can tell that or not, or if you feel that, but I'm getting more bourbon out of it now than I did when it was colder. But it's definitely a rounder, softer beer than it was than the first one that I drank.
Yeah. I think it's. I think you let it age, it's going to mellow out a little bit, but. From the beginning, I've enjoyed the bourbon. I mean, I wanted to get the characteristics from the barrel, but not overwhelming. And I think that's why we looked at being this our first one, didn't know exactly when to pull it out, but when we did sample, and so in that 8th month, it really tasted, I thought, very, very good. So that's when we pulled it out, and I think it turned out pretty good.
One of the things that I like about what you did, how you finished the beer, was that you took the time and trouble to wax the beer, to wax the bottles. And that means that I feel comfortable, and I'm going to do this, putting a date on, say, 10 of those beers, and I'm going to drink one a year for 10 years at the holidays in the middle of winter. And because of the way the beer has been bottled, I'm confident that it will stay good. It won't oxidize. So kudos to the wax.
The women army. No, that's So how did you carbonate this?
Well, we kegged it. So we took it from the barrel, kegged it, force carbonated it, and then we took it from there and bottled it, and then let it sit, and then we waxed the bottle.
One challenge if you're going to try to bottle condition something like this, if it's like 12 or 13%, maybe the original yeast is not going to be able to be good enough to eat those sugars, and maybe then you got to put in some champagne yeast or something else like that, it's a challenge.
Yeah, that was part of the reason for kegging is that, that's what I always do, so I was used to it, but it would be easier to bottle carbonate this. Obviously, it takes another step out of this huge project, but I didn't want it to not carbonate. So I've read some, about that, and I just thought it was probably safest to go with the kegging option. So that's what we did.
Well, listen, this is nicely carbonated. It's and the bitterness is still there. It's the bitterness. Eventually the bitterness will fall out, and it'll become, like you said, rounder. And less sharp. One would think that the bourbon character would mellow over time as well. But right at this point, the carbonation and the hop bitterness is balanced very nicely in this beer. It is a giant beer. It's big and chewy, but it's not as it's not like the Oscar Blues beer 1050, which is like, it's delicious, but it's like drinking a milkshake. You know, it's just like, oh, at least the last, it's been years since I've had one, but just like, oh my God, it's so chewy and delicious and sweet. But this is not like that. This is maybe a little too drinkable in that in that you could drink a lot of this, you know, if you're not careful. But this is obviously not a beer that you want to drink a whole bomber of. Yeah, I think this is I'm really happy that you know, that this beer turned out so well.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. I mean, I was surprised, you know, how it turned out. You don't really know going in how everything's going to turn out, but you know, it seemed I've been like very happy with really how everything's come about.
Well, nicely done. So what is the next candidate to go in the barrels? Because now we got less of the bourbon character left over in there, one would assume, but maybe we have some Russian Imperial Stout character now in the barrel. What would be next?
So I'm leaning towards. I was thinking of doing a quad, but I actually like doubles better than I do, or doubles, or however people call them.
The bells are in Wisconsin.
I'm going to call it a double. I live in Arkansas. Okay?
There you go.
So, but I like doubles better, and I've actually had a bourbon barrel double, and it was delicious. So I think that I'm leaning towards. I like Belgian beers, so I'm leaning towards a Belgian double, putting it in the.
Would you be tempted to replenish the bourbon into some fresh bourbon into the barrel?
Yes.
There's no temptation there. It's a plan.
Yeah. I think that's always a good thing. In fact, that's a good way to keep your barrel hydrated. What we would do is we would, you know, flip the barrel on its head and leave it there for a day or two, and then flip it again, and the bourbon helps it, you know, stay hydrated.
Now, see, I tell my wife that's how I want to stay hydrated, but she keeps telling me no.
Well, you keep drinking bourbon and flipping on your head.
I know, but I will hydrate it. This is the thing.
Saying nothing about the bung, but anyway, that's another thing. Oh wow.
Okay.
Well, this has been fun. I'm really. You're gonna. Yes.
Yes.
I'm really happy that you. I thought he was going to come up with another thing, but he physically put his hand on his mouth, so maybe that's a good thing.
Oh well.
I'm happy as well, because this beer is making me happy right now. I don't know if you're interested in hearing the story of the label.
Oh yeah, you bet.
Okay, so we actually made a label for this, and so it's got the bourbon barrel down at the bottom. It's got St. Basil's Cathedral sitting on top of the bourbon barrel, which is the theme of the Russian Stout. And then it's called Slava Boga. So Slava Boga, where that comes from. So my dad was a missionary, actually in Russia, which is people used to think he was a CIA agent, but he was actually a missionary over there. And but there was a thing that the congregations over there would say. They would say Slava Boga, which means praise the Lord. Okay, so my hope was that when people drink this, that they say, praise the Lord.
Well, it's better than God bless him. God bless him.
Yeah, that's what we...
If you're a Southerner, you get that.
Yeah. He's dumb as a post. God bless him.
God bless him.
God love him.
Bless his heart.
Bless his heart. He's dumb as a post.
I got to give a little props to as well. So the church that I go to, Thrive Christian Church, is in Fayetteville here. We actually are a church plant at the old Chuck E. Cheese, which has a walk-in cooler. And so where the barrel sat was actually in our church walk-in cooler. And it sat there for 8 months. So, you know, if anybody wants a good church that believes in bourbon barrel beers, hey, there you go.
Yeah, communion is a great time.
That's right. Oh, yeah, we have lots of fun. Yeah.
Slava Boga.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for including us, and I hope that you'll do so again.
Yeah. Oh, I would love to. Yeah, absolutely. Maybe I'll have to go to the bank again to get a loan, but other than that, no. It was a lot of fun and well worth it, and I look forward. Hopefully, we can do it again.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Thanks, James.
Well, thanks again to Reece and to Steve. that is a delicious beer, and I'm going to try to stay away from it and let it age to see how it develops over time. By the way, that Basic Brewing radio show that I talked about with Chris Colby was called High Gravity Mash Efficiency, and it was from February 19th of 2015. God, it's 3 years ago. It's crazy. Time flies. Good information in there if you're wondering how to get the best efficiency when you brew a high-gravity all-grain beer. So that's February 19th of 2015. If you have brewing questions, show suggestions, or just want to say howdy, write to James at basicbrewing.com or just fill out the contact form at basicbrewing.com. And please don't forget to tell us where you're from. Thanks to everybody supporting us through our Patreon page. Special goodies like special releases and early releases coming your way. If you join up, check all that out at patreon.com/basicbrewing. Be sure to check out our DVDs, Extract Brewing and Partial Mashing, Stepping into All Grain, Low-Tech Lagering and Decoction Mashing, and Introduction to Wine Kits. You can find them all on our site. You can get a free Basic Brewing bottle opener with any DVD combo. Get a free, or you can check out our Basic Brewing shirts in the store as well. They're not free. You can find our logbooks where you can track and log up to 50 batches of beer, but you can get free stickers if you order stuff from our shop. Check all that out at basicbrewingshop.com. Don't forget you can also join the American Homebrewers Association and subscribe to Brew Your Own magazine through the associate links on basicbrewing.com. It's all until next time. Till then, thanks for listening, everybody. I'm James Spencer. Production help for Basic Brewing Radio and our website is provided by Kelly Dotson. Basic Brewing Radio is a production of Active Voice, and we'll talk to you next time, everybody. So long.